The billionaire's dog recognized a stranger, but she was his amnesiac lover. If you believe love can survive even when memory fades, stay with us until the very end of this story. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had just begun to fall over the Carrington estate, soft and steady, the kind that made the air smell like wet cedar and salt from the nearby Atlantic. Inside the glass-walled living room, Raphael Carrington sat alone, a figure of quiet control wrapped in a tailored gray suit. The flicker from the fireplace caught the edge of a photograph on the table, two smiling faces and a golden retriever between them. His hand lingered on it for a moment before he turned away. The world had not seen that smile in 2 years. Outside, the iron gate creaked. Atlas, the golden retriever, lifted his head and gave a sharp bark. Another, louder. The sound broke through the rhythmic patter of rain. Raphael frowned and walked toward the entryway, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Through the fogged glass, a shadow stood at the gate, a woman, soaked through, clutching a small canvas bag to her chest. When the security light blinked on, he froze. Her face, her eyes, her posture. It could not be. She was supposed to be gone, lost in the sea that night. Atlas bounded forward, tail wagging furiously, barking and whining as if he had seen a ghost. The woman stepped back, startled but smiling softly, bending down to meet the dog's eager face. "Hey, easy there, boy," she said gently, her voice low, uncertain. Atlas pressed against her legs and let out a sound halfway between a bark and a sob. Raphael unlocked the gate with a trembling hand. "Do you know this dog?" he asked. She looked up, water dripping from the ends of her long hair, her eyes the color of the storm itself. "No," she said after a pause, "but he seems to know me." Her name, she explained, was Clara. She had come from Maine, looking for work, gardening, caretaking, anything. She had heard that the Carrington estate sometimes hired local help. She did not seem to recognize him. She did not even flinch at his name. For a long moment, Raphael said nothing. The world had slowed to the rhythm of the rain. The woman who stood before him looked exactly like Mia Navarro, the wife he had lost 2 years ago in that violent storm off the Hamptons coast. But this woman's eyes held only polite distance, not the warmth he remembered. Atlas whined and nudged her hand. She laughed softly, almost shyly, and stroked his head. That simple sound pierced something in Raphael that had been locked away since the night of the accident. He cleared his throat. "You can come in," he said finally, "at least until the rain stops." Inside, the light from the chandelier spilled over her damp jacket and worn boots. Everything about her looked modest, ordinary. But her presence filled the room with a strange familiarity. She glanced at the framed photograph on the table, at the woman who looked exactly like her, and asked, "Your wife?" Raphael hesitated. The fire cracked. "She passed away," he said quietly. "Oh," she whispered, her eyes lowering. "I am sorry." Atlas rested his head on her knee. She smiled and scratched behind his ears, unaware that the gesture mirrored the way Mia used to calm him before every thunderstorm. Raphael stood a few feet away, watching as the dog leaned closer into her hand. His chest tightened with a feeling he could not name. Fate had a cruel sense of humor, or perhaps it was giving him one last chance to make peace with the past. Outside, the storm gathered strength, tapping against the windows like fingertips on glass. Inside, silence stretched between two strangers who were anything but strangers. And in that silence, Raphael Carrington understood that the life he thought was over had just opened its eyes again. Before we continue, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us continue the story. The morning after the storm, the Carrington estate looked washed clean. Sunlight spilled across the marble foyer, glinting off the silver frames that lined the walls. The scent of wet pine drifted in from the garden. Raphael stood by the tall windows, his coffee untouched, his thoughts far from the spreadsheets glowing on his tablet. In the courtyard, the woman called Clara knelt beside Atlas, brushing fallen leaves from the stone path. Her hair, dark and still damp from the rain, caught the light like threads of ink. She wore a simple white shirt and borrowed jeans that looked 2 sizes too large. Yet she moved with quiet grace, the kind that did not belong to strangers. Raphael had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in the rain, Atlas pressed against her, both of them looking at him as if time had folded back on itself. Lydia Carrington entered the room without knocking. Her sharp eyes, framed by a sleek bob of chestnut hair, caught him staring out the window. "You brought her inside," she said flatly. "The gardener from Maine?" He did not look away. "She needed shelter." "She looks like her." Lydia's tone softened, but only slightly. "You know that, do you not? You of all people should not chase ghosts." Raphael set the tablet down. "I am not chasing anyone. She has nowhere to go. I offered her a job." Lydia folded her arms. "A job, or a replacement." He turned, his voice low. "You think I do not see the difference?" For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Lydia sighed and shook her head. "You never could let go." She left quietly, her heels clicking down the hall. Outside, Clara looked up at the window, feeling the weight of someone's gaze. When Raphael stepped out to the garden, she stood quickly. "I am almost done," she said. Atlas helped. The dog barked once, tail wagging. Raphael managed a faint smile. "He seems to have decided you belong here." "I am not sure I belong anywhere," she said softly, brushing dirt from her hands. He hesitated, then spoke with measured calm. "If you would like, you may stay on. There is a guest house at the edge of the property. You can assist with the garden and take care of Atlas. I will have someone arrange the details." Her expression flickered between gratitude and confusion. "Why would you trust me that easily?" "Because Atlas already has," he said simply. That night the mansion felt different. There was movement again, footsteps in the halls, the sound of a kettle whistling in the kitchen. Raphael watched from the study as Clara moved about the house, her presence both foreign and familiar. She paused by the fireplace and looked at a framed painting, a portrait of Raphael done in soft strokes of charcoal. "Who drew this?" she asked. He froze. "My wife?" he answered quietly. "She was talented," Clara said, tracing the air just above the glass. "You must miss her." Every word was a blade turned inward. Every day. She turned toward him, her gaze gentle but searching. "You have kind eyes," she said after a moment. "But there is a sadness you do not hide well." Before he could answer, Atlas padded in and nudged a folded blanket toward her. She laughed and bent to take it. The sound of her laughter filled the room with warmth that had been missing for years. When she looked up again, Raphael was still watching her. Something in his expression had changed, no longer disbelief, but wonder, fragile and dangerous. Later, as he stood at the balcony overlooking the sea, the wind carried the faint sound of her voice from the garden below. She was humming a melody he knew too well. The same song Mia used to hum when she painted late at night. Raphael closed his eyes. For the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to whisper her name into the open air. Mia. Down below, Clara stopped humming, her head tilting slightly, as if she had heard something she could not quite place. The sea wind swirled around her, carrying the faint scent of salt and memory. Something inside her stirred an ache, a flicker of a life she could not remember. And as the sun set behind the Carrington estate, the line between the past and the present began to blur. Days passed like quiet ripples across the surface of a lake. The Carrington estate, once a place of stillness and shadow, had begun to breathe again. The sound of Atlas's paws against the hardwood floors, the scent of brewed coffee, the soft murmur of a woman's voice reading in the garden. These simple things brought life back to the mansion. Clara had settled into her new role. Every morning she walked the gardens, pruning roses and trimming ivy, always with Atlas close behind. Sometimes she hummed without realizing it, an old tune that lingered in the air like the memory of sunlight. Raphael would pause by the window of his study just to listen. It was never the melody itself that stopped him, but the way her voice carried the same warmth he had thought was lost forever. One afternoon, Raphael found her near the fountain. She was sketching in a small notebook, her brows slightly furrowed, her lips pressed together in focus. The breeze lifted the edge of the page, revealing a half-finished portrait his face. He stood there for a long moment, unable to move. Clara looked up suddenly and flushed with embarrassment. "I did not mean to intrude," she said quickly. "You were standing by the window yesterday, and the light." "It is all right," Raphael said quietly. "You draw very well." She smiled a little. "Thank you. I do not even remember learning how. Sometimes the pencil just moves. I think my hands know things that my mind has forgotten." Raphael's heart tightened. The truth was close. Too close. He wanted to tell her everything, but fear held him still. Instead, he said softly, Maybe memories are not always lost. Sometimes they wait for the right place to return. A moment of silence stretched between them. Then Atlas broke it by dropping a tennis ball at her feet. Clara laughed, the sound bright and unguarded. Raphael felt the weight in his chest lighten, if only for a second. That evening, Lydia returned from the city. She found her brother at the piano, playing softly. "You have not touched that thing in 2 years," she said, lowering her coat onto the chair. "You are letting her stay longer than necessary." Raphael kept his eyes on the keys. "She is good for Atlas, and for the house." Lydia crossed her arms. "You mean she is good for you? I know that look, Raphael. Do not make the same mistake twice. You cannot bring Mia back." He stopped playing. The name hung in the air like a ghost. "I am not trying to," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Lydia sighed. "You need to tell her the truth before someone else does. Secrets rot everything they touch." She turned and left, leaving the echo of her words behind. Later that night, Raphael stood by the window again. Clara was outside, talking softly to Atlas as she brushed his golden fur. Her hands were gentle, her movements patient. The way she smiled down at the dog reminded him of the woman he had loved, the one who had once said, "You cannot fix people, Raphael. You can only make them feel safe enough to heal." The wind shifted. It carried the faint scent of lavender, Mia's perfume. His chest ached with the weight of recognition and regret. When Clara came inside, she found him still standing there. "You should rest," she said. "You look tired." "Ardo, I do not sleep much," he admitted. "Maybe you should try," she said softly. "Even the strongest walls need to rest, or they start to crumble." Her words hit deeper than she could have known. Raphael managed a small smile. "I will keep that in mind." Before heading upstairs, Clara stopped at the base of the staircase. "Mr. Carrington?" "Yes?" "Thank you for letting me stay. I feel safe here." He swallowed hard. "You are welcome, Clara." She smiled, then disappeared up the stairs. Atlas followed her, tail wagging. The echo of her footsteps faded, leaving Raphael alone with his thoughts. He looked at the photograph on the mantel, Mia's smile frozen in time beside his own. The resemblance was no longer just physical. It was something deeper, something that reached past logic. As the clock struck midnight, Raphael whispered to the empty room, "If fate is cruel enough to bring her back without her memories, then I will wait for her heart to remember." "Come, Kau." Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and for a fleeting moment, it sounded like a woman's laughter carried through the night. Autumn deepened across the Hamptons, painting the Carrington estate in gold and rust. The once silent halls were now filled with faint music, footsteps, and the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. To everyone else, it was just another season. But for Raphael Carrington, every sunrise beside this woman who called herself Clara felt like walking through the outline of a dream he could not wake from. Clara had grown more at ease in the house. She laughed easily, she spoke freely, and she filled the space with something that felt like light. The staff adored her kindness, and Atlas followed her like a shadow. Yet behind Raphael's steady composure, tension had begun to coil tighter each day. He could see pieces of her old self surfacing, small, unexplainable instincts that betrayed the truth she still did not know. One morning, while watering the garden, Clara found a small key buried in the soil near the rose bushes. It was old, tarnished silver, with a faint engraving of the Carrington crest. She brought it inside. "Do you know what this belongs to?" she asked, holding it out to Raphael. He stared at the key longer than he should have. His throat tightened. It was the key to her art studio, sealed since the night of the accident. "It must have been lost years ago," he said carefully. "You can leave it with me." Instead, she smiled. "Maybe I can clean it up first. Old things deserve a little care." Her words hit him like a wave of memory. Mia had said the same thing once about him. That evening, Raphael stood in the study, gazing at the fireplace. On the mantel sat the portrait she had drawn of him. The line work was identical to Mia's, the strokes precise, tender, alive. His hand trembled as he reached toward it. How could someone forget everything and still draw the same way? How could her soul remember what her mind had erased? Atlas barked once and turned toward the hallway. Raphael followed and found Clara standing by the double doors at the far end of the corridor, the entrance to the locked studio. She held the key in her palm. "This door has been sealed," she said softly. "Atlas led me here. I did not even know it existed." Raphael hesitated. "There is nothing inside worth seeing." "Then why do you look afraid?" she asked. He could not answer. The lie tasted bitter. Before he could stop her, she slid the key into the lock. The old mechanism clicked, and the door creaked open. Dust floated in the air like ghosts rising from sleep. Inside were canvases stacked against the wall, brushes hardened with dried paint, and a single easel facing the window that overlooked the sea. On it rested a half-finished painting, her own reflection beside his. Clara stepped closer, her hand trembling as she touched the dried paint. "Who painted this?" Raphael's voice broke. "You did." She turned, confusion written across her face. "Me?" He nodded slowly. "Your name was Mia Navarro. You were my wife." The air left the room. She took a step back, shaking her head. "No, that cannot be true." He stepped forward, careful, his tone gentle. "The accident took your memories. I never meant to deceive you. I only wanted to protect you from what happened before." Her eyes filled with tears. "You lied to me." "I wanted to give you peace," he said. "You deserved a chance to start over." "You should have given me the truth," she whispered. Atlas whimpered beside her, sensing the storm between them. She turned and fled the room, leaving the key clattering to the floor. Raphael stood alone, the portrait behind him glowing faintly in the dim light. Everything he had feared was now real. She knew the truth, but not the love that once held them together. Outside, the wind from the sea howled against the glass. In the distance, Clara walked through the garden, toward the guest house, tears mixing with the cold night air. The roses she had nurtured swayed under the coming storm, petals breaking free and scattering like the pieces of a life she could no longer understand. And inside the mansion, Raphael Carrington realized that sometimes love did not vanish with time, it simply waited for the right moment to shatter all over again. The storm rolled in before dawn, heavy and relentless, drumming against the windows of the Carrington estate. Inside, the house felt emptier than ever. Clara had not come down for breakfast, and her absence echoed through the rooms like an unanswered question. Raphael stood at the balcony overlooking the garden, the same place where she had once smiled at him. Now, the roses below were soaked and bent, their petals scattered like fragments of a forgotten promise. He had spent the night replaying her face after she heard the truth shock, pain, disbelief. The memory was sharper than any wound. Lydia had been right all along. Secrets rot everything they touch. When Lydia arrived that morning, she found her brother standing motionless by the fireplace. "You look like a man waiting for a verdict," she said quietly. Raphael's voice was low. "She knows. I told her everything." Lydia's eyes softened with both worry and resignation. "Then all you can do now is let her choose whether to stay." "She will not," he replied. "I took her peace and gave her pain in return." Yementai. Lydia placed a hand on his shoulder. "Pain is sometimes the only way back to truth." Outside, Atlas barked near the guest house. Raphael turned at the sound. "Stay here," he told Lydia, and stepped into the rain. He found Clara sitting on the porch steps, her hair wet and clinging to her face. She held the silver key in her hands, the same one that had unlocked everything. Atlas lay beside her, his head resting on her knee. She looked up when Raphael approached but did not stand. "You should not be out here," he said softly. "I could say the same to you," she answered. "It seems we both like pretending we are fine." Raphael stopped a few feet away. "I never wanted to hurt you. When they found you on the shore, you were broken and barely breathing. The doctors said the trauma had erased your memory. I thought if I told you everything, it would crush you." She looked down at the key in her palm. "You should have trusted me to decide what I could handle." "Come." He took a slow breath. "You are right." For a long time, only the rain spoke. Then she asked quietly, "Who was I before all of this?" Raphael knelt beside her. "You were the woman who taught me that love is not control. You made this house feel alive. You painted sunlight into rooms that had forgotten how to breathe." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "And yet I do not remember any of it." "Memory or not," he said, "you are still her. The way you laugh, the way Atlas looks at you, it is all still there." She looked at the dog, who lifted his head and nudged her hand, whining softly. "He never forgot," she murmured. "Maybe I am the one who did." Raphael reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "I am leaving for New York tomorrow. There is a charity gala part of the Carrington Foundation. I want you to come with me, not because you have to, but because I need you to see the world you built before you lost it." "Ah." Clara hesitated, the key still in her hand. "I do not know if I can face that." He stood, his expression steady but gentle. "Then, come as yourself, not as my wife, not as anyone's memory, just as Clara." She looked at him for a long moment, her heart torn between fear and something she could not name. Finally, she nodded once. "All right, I will go." That night, Raphael returned to his study alone. The rain had quieted, leaving the scent of salt and earth in the air. He opened the drawer of his desk and took out the original contract, the marriage agreement signed 2 years ago. The ink had faded, but her signature was still clear, bold, and full of life. He stared at it until the firelight blurred his vision. Then, without hesitation, he folded it once and placed it in the pocket of his suit. Tomorrow, the gala would test more than his company's future. It would test whether love could exist without memory, without lies, and without the paper that once bound it. As the clock struck midnight, Atlas padded into the room, curling up at Raphael's feet. The man reached down, his voice a whisper meant for no one else. "Tomorrow, we find out if fate can forgive me." Outside, the first light of morning crept over the horizon, pale and uncertain, just like hope. The night of the gala arrived with a chill wind sweeping in from the Atlantic. The Carrington Foundation's annual charity event had always been a dazzling affair, a stage for elegance and power. But for Raphael Carrington, this evening was not about investors or headlines. It was about one woman and the truth that could either heal or destroy what remained between them. The ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, filled with the soft hum of conversation and the distant notes of a string quartet. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. Cameras flashed as guests arrived, dressed in velvet and silk. When Clara stepped from the car, a hush rippled through the entrance. She wore a navy gown that shimmered under the lights, her hair swept to one side. For a brief second, Raphael forgot how to breathe. She looked exactly as Mia had the night of their wedding, calm, radiant, unknowingly his undoing. Atlas, fitted with a small ribbon collar, walked beside them as the Foundation's symbol of compassion. Reporters whispered, "Is that the new Mrs. Carrington?" And, "He said his wife died, did he not?" Raphael guided her past the flashing cameras. His hand brushed lightly against hers, the contact brief but electric. "You are safe," he murmured. "No one here knows the truth unless you tell them." Inside, the ballroom shimmered with gold and silver. Clara's eyes darted across the room, catching reflections in every mirror hers, and the portrait of a woman in a magazine spread nearby. It was a feature about the late Mia Navarro, artist and humanitarian. The resemblance struck her like lightning. She swallowed hard. As they moved through the crowd, board members greeted Raphael with formal smiles. Lydia stood near the bar, watching from a distance, worry written across her face. When their eyes met, she gave a small nod, silently urging him to be honest. During dinner, a journalist approached their table. "Mr. Carrington, this foundation is a tribute to your late wife, is it not? Tell us what inspired you to continue her work." The question hung heavy in the air. Raphael looked at Clara, then back at the reporter. "It is a tribute," he said carefully, "to a woman who taught me that kindness is not a weakness. Everything you see here exists because of her heart." Clara's hand trembled under the table. The words struck a chord she could not explain. A series of flashes filled her mind-paint-stained hands, a laugh echoing across the sea, a storm, and the blinding crash of water. She gasped softly. Raphael turned toward her. "Are you all right?" "I need air," she whispered, rising from her seat. He followed her onto the terrace. The night air was cold, scented with salt and roses. She gripped the railing as fragments of memory flooded back in waves. "I remember," she said faintly, "the sea. The light. You shouting my name. Thumbs up." Raphael stepped closer, voice shaking. "You fell from the deck that night. The storm came too fast. I searched for you until the Coast Guard pulled me away. I thought I had lost you forever." Tears filled her eyes. "And when I came back, you hid the truth." "I was afraid," he said. "Afraid that if I told you, the pain would take you from me again." Clara turned to face him fully. "Pain does not destroy love, Raphael. Lies do." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out the faded contract. "This was the paper that tied us together once," he said, holding it out. "I kept it, not because of duty, but because it reminded me of the day I made a promise I never fulfilled." She stared at the document, the ink smudged by time. "You do not need that to keep a promise," she whispered. He smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "Then tell me what I should keep." "Keep your word," she said. "Keep your heart open." "Matri." A soft cheer rose from inside as the orchestra began a new song. The wind carried the melody across the terrace. Clara looked out over the sea, her voice trembling. I may never remember everything we were, but I want to know who we can still be. Raphael took her hand, and for the first time in years, hope felt real again. Atlas padded onto the terrace, curling at their feet as if to bless the fragile peace forming between them. Beneath the moonlight, Raphael whispered, "Then let this be the night we stop living in the past." Clara nodded slowly, her tears glinting like rain, "and start writing the promise all over again." The next morning, the sky over the Carrington estate was pale blue, washed clean by the night rain. The ballroom from the gala had been dismantled, but the echoes of the evening still lingered, the music, the whispers, and the truth that had finally been spoken. Raphael stood in the garden with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. The roses Clara had planted weeks ago were beginning to bloom again, their petals open to the sunlight. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something close to peace. Yet beneath it all was a quiet fear. Truth could bring healing, but it could also leave scars that refused to fade. He turned at the sound of soft footsteps. Clara walked toward him, her long hair loose, brushing over her shoulders. She looked rested, but there was a certain distance in her eyes, as if she were standing between two worlds, the one she remembered and the one she was still learning to believe. Atlas trotted beside her, tail swaying gently. "I could not sleep," she said, her voice low but steady. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the storm again. I saw the deck breaking apart. I saw you reaching for me." Raphael's chest tightened. "You remember that?" "Only fragments," she admitted. "But they feel real now. Maybe that is enough." She paused, looking around the garden. "It is strange, standing here and knowing I once called this place home. Everything feels both familiar and foreign, like walking through someone else's dream." He set down his cup and approached her carefully. "You do not have to force the memories. They will come when you are ready." Clara shook her head. "It is not about remembering anymore. It is about understanding. I spent 2 years searching for who I was, and now I realize it was never about the past. It was about finding who I am now." Her words struck him harder than he expected. "And who are you now?" She smiled faintly. "Someone who wants to stop running. Someone who wants to live honestly." Raphael's voice was quiet. "Then you are already the woman I fell in love with." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and earth. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the small silver key she had once found buried near the roses. "I think this belongs to you," she said, placing it in his palm. He looked down at it. "No," he said. "It belongs to you. You unlocked that door, not me." Their eyes met, steady and unguarded. It was not the gaze of strangers anymore, but of two people finally standing on equal ground. "I do not know what happens next," she said softly. "Then we will find out together," he answered. Atlas barked once, breaking the silence. Clara laughed, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The sound of her laughter filled the garden again, bright and alive. Raphael reached for her hand. "Whatever happens, no more lies. No more contracts," she said, smiling through her tears. "Only choices." The sun rose higher, casting golden light across the garden. Atlas ran ahead, chasing the light, while behind him, two hearts began again, not where memory had left them, but where truth had finally brought them back. Weeks passed quietly, the kind of quiet that follows a storm. The Carrington estate no longer felt haunted. There were fresh flowers in every vase, open windows that let in the sound of the sea, and laughter that drifted down the halls again. Yet deep inside, Raphael knew that peace never stayed untested for long. One morning, he found Clara in the sunroom sorting through a box of old letters. The soft light painted her face in gold. "These are from the Art Foundation," she said, holding up an envelope. "They are planning a new exhibit in your wife's honor. I mean, in my honor." She smiled with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. "It still feels strange to say that." Raphael approached, his expression gentle. "They want to dedicate the gallery to you. It was your project before the accident. You raised most of the funds yourself. I read the reports," she said. "I was someone who believed in second chances for artists, for people trying to start over. Maybe that is still who I am." "You are," Raphael said. "More than you know." She set the letters aside and looked at him. "You once asked what I wanted to keep? I think I have my answer now. I want to keep what is real, not what was written on paper." He nodded, his gaze steady. "Then so do I." Cold. Later that afternoon, a storm warning appeared on the news. It was not as fierce as the one from 2 years ago, But the sky turned the same shade of gray that once took her away. Raphael looked out the window, uneasy. Memories he thought he had buried returned in sharp flashes. Clara came to stand beside him. "You are afraid of losing me again," she said quietly. He did not deny it. "That night, I thought the sea had taken everything I loved." She reached for his hand. "You do not have to keep watching the horizon. I am right here." He turned to her, his voice unsteady. "Then stay here tonight. No work, no guests, just us and the rain." She smiled. "All right." The storm rolled in after dark, the rain tapping gently on the windows. They sat together by the fire, Atlas curled at their feet. For the first time, Raphael did not feel the need to fill the silence with words. It was enough just to be near her, to feel the warmth that had once been lost. After a while, Clara stood and crossed the room. On the mantel sat the old contract, folded neatly beside the silver key. She picked it up, her fingers brushing over the faded ink. "This is where we began," she said softly. Raphael rose, watching her. "And where it ends." She smiled and held the paper over the fire. The flame caught the edge, curling it to ash. "No more promises written in fear," she whispered. "Only the ones we make now." "Tumyu." Raphael stepped closer, taking her hand as the last corner of the paper turned to dust. The light flickered across their faces, reflecting in her eyes. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea, but inside, the storm brought peace. Atlas sighed and rested his head between them, the symbol of everything they had endured. Raphael looked at her, his voice quiet but certain. "You found your way back without memory, without rules, without contracts. That means what we have now is real." "Oh." Clara leaned into him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then let the storm wash away everything else." And as the rain fell harder, they stayed there, unafraid, two hearts that had found their way home. Spring arrived at the Carrington estate with a gentleness that felt almost deliberate, as if the world itself had decided they had endured enough storms. The air smelled of salt and new grass. The gardens Mia, now Clara, had once tended bloomed in full color, roses and lilies bending toward the light. The house, once a place of ghosts, had become a home again. It had been exactly 1 year since that night when the old contract had burned to ash. The foundation had grown stronger than ever, expanding its reach to help struggling artists across the country. Every gallery bore a small plaque at the entrance that read, "Dedicated to the belief that love and creation both deserve second chances." This morning, the estate buzzed quietly with preparations. White ribbons fluttered from the trees. Rows of chairs lined the garden path. The scent of hydrangeas floated in the breeze. Lydia stood by the archway, clipboard in hand, trying to hide her smile. Raphael adjusted his tie nervously, glancing at his sister. "Do you think she will actually show up?" Lydia raised an eyebrow. "She agreed to marry you again, did she not?" "I would say the odds are in your favor." Atlas barked from nearby as if to confirm it. Moments later, Clara appeared at the end of the garden path, wearing a simple ivory dress that caught the sunlight like silk. Her hair fell loose down her back, soft waves moving with the wind. The guests stood as she approached, but Raphael could not see anyone but her. When she reached him, she smiled in that quiet, knowing way that had always undone him. "You look nervous," she teased. "Terrified," he admitted. "The last time I married you, there was a contract involved." "This time," she said, taking his hand, "there is only a choice." The minister began to speak, his voice gentle over the rustle of leaves. As they exchanged vows, Raphael's mind drifted through the years of silence, the loss, the rediscovery, and the night she had walked through his gate as a stranger. Every moment had led to this one. When it came time to present the rings, Clara lifted her left hand. The faint scar around her finger, once a mark of the past, now gleamed beneath the new band of gold. "It fits perfectly," she said softly. Raphael smiled. "It was always meant to." "Amé?" The guests applauded as the ceremony ended, but the loudest cheer came from Atlas, who barked and ran in circles before lying down at their feet with a happy sigh. Later, as the sun began to set, Clara and Raphael stood together near the water. The sea was calm, its surface shimmering like glass. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had never come back?" He looked out toward the horizon. "Every day. But then I remember that you did, and that is enough." She smiled, turning to face him. "You once said you wanted to be forgiven by fate. I think you were." Raphael brushed a strand of hair from her face. No, he said, we were. Atlas barked again, chasing a falling petal as if it were a piece of light. The waves whispered against the shore, and the wind carried the faint sound of laughter his, and something timeless between them. The world around them had changed, but love, once lost and found again, had written its final promise in the only place that could never fade. The heart.